can beat them.
What do you know about the U.S. Opens for the Global Games?
You want us to compete as women. $5,000 prizes.
My lover says you were a great coach back in the day.
Join them.
This is the way the world is now. My 8-year-old daughter told me all about it.
So a guy can become a girl with no physical changes at all.
Oh, that's called gender fluid.
The Daily Wire has come out with this new movie, Lady Ballers, but I asked a simple question. Will this movie actually win the culture war for conservatives? Or perhaps the better title for this video would have been Lady Ballers in the Limits of a Mockery. Because Lady Ballers is essentially one long discourse in mockery of a sort of leftist mentality about gender, and particularly the movie focuses on a mockery of men who take advantage of the system by using modern sensibilities about gender and sex, i.e. that they're fluid and things of that sort, to shoehorn an advantage into the system, and then by doing that disenfranchise the women's athletes in this case that have worked hard to advance in their respective athletic leagues. And my friends, while this is a very, very important issue to take on, in fact, I've taken it on several times on my channel, not just this issue, but I've taken on the broader issue of gender ideology and its profound implications for a just and prosperous society, I don't think, number one, the way that Lady Ballers goes about dealing with this issue is the best way to reach the most amount of people. And number two, I don't believe that at this point, mockery is sufficient for the right to make its argument to the American people and more broadly to Western civilization if we truly wish to have an impact. It's one thing to mock an idea. And by the way, some ideas most certainly deserve mocking. But mocking is limited because it oftentimes will only appeal to the people that already agree with the ideology that is mocking the other ideology. So in a sense, when you mock the fact that, yes, there are some men that decide to game the system and use this sort of idea of gender fluidity as a cover, when you mock that, who are the people being reached by that? Conservatives, people on the right, people like me who appreciate reality, they may be being reached by that. I personally, it's not my thing, and I've been very clear in my content. I don't attack transgender people. I don't disparage them. In fact, there are some transgender folks in my audience that watch me. I think that adults in their own private capacities have the right to make decisions for themselves. But there are also many transgender conservatives that agree with me when I say it is a matter of fairness when you compromise the integrity of certain sports to appease some vague notion of political correctness, and I oppose that. Therefore, I oppose biological men competing in women's sports. That's what I oppose, and there are plenty of transgender conservatives like Blair White who would agree with me. So I'm not out there to mock people, but just in general, it's not my style to mock things. It's my style to investigate things and try to understand things for how they are and try to take those implications to a broader point for edification. But when you mock, you simply preach to the choir, and in some cases, you engage with the least strongest argument for the position that you are mocking. Mocking comes from passion, not from the intellect. And again, some ideas deserve to be mocked. Some ideas are so self-evidently ridiculous that mockery is the only fitting response to them. But if we are trying to really enhance the culture and win the culture war, mockery itself is not going to be an advantageous tool for us. Because as I mentioned, there are people outside the contours of the political right who may be independent-minded, may be centrist, may be milquetoast or on the fence, and they also need to be reached. Now, I don't believe in dumbing down the truth or diluting the truth to get your message out there. In fact, just the opposite. I am someone who speaks the radical truth all the time. But how you speak the truth is almost as important as the truth itself being spoken. Because a lot of human beings, and I'm starting to learn this, we are inherently rational, but we don't apprehend issues always in a rational way. Sometimes our emotional triggers will take over our decision-making for us. And when man is guided by his emotions and not his reason, he cannot do coherent action. And so it's very important to be able to reach different kinds of people by speaking to different kinds of people. and not pretending like something like Lady Ballers is going to be able to reach certain kinds of people who may really need to see it, who may actually be possessed by the ideas we're attacking. But also, I want to kind of go beyond just this movie and talk about the culture war itself and the broader implications of the culture war. I think movies like Lady Ballers actually kind of exemplify this mentality. A lot of people are far more concerned about waging the cultural war to reach political ends. I hear the famous oft-quoted Andrew Breitbart quote all the time: politics is downstream of culture. If you want to change politics, change the culture. And while I certainly agree that politics is culture is the foundation of the political system, necessarily, it has to be. Although I think in the case of Western civilization, and particularly in America over the past 100 or so years, culture has become eroded at the basis of politics. That's a different story, different day. Well, that much is true. It casts culture solely in a light that involves power and involves the pursuit of something, a pursuit of a tool, because politics is a tool. It's a very limited view of culture. I don't think the political implications of the culture war are as important as the social implications of the culture war. It's one thing, for example, to rail against mass migration, which is a political program that internationalists throughout the world that work for groups like the EU, the UN, the Atlantic Council, all these centralized planning groups that were created in the post-war consensus to maintain a strong control over how Western governments conduct their military. Notice, whenever you see all these endless wars around the world, whether it be Afghanistan, Iraq, whether it be Kuwait, whether it had been Libya in 2011, whether it be Ukraine, regardless, always look to see what ideology stands to benefit from those wars happening? What ideological basis do those wars have? And you will almost always see in all those cases a strong push from these internationalist groups to pursue these destructive and anti-national sovereignty actions that are known as war, the most destructive activity of human potential known to man. But it's one thing to be against mass migration as a political program. It's another thing to actually have a culture that would have prevented the entire idea of mass migration from happening in the first place. For example, in the UK, and I'm speaking in very broad strokes, a lot of folks will say that mass migration is harming British culture or what have you. But the culture in Britain itself, as of right now, is not one of intellectual strength and moral conviction. And I'm not trying to insult any of my viewers from the UK, I'm just being honest with you guys. It is one of complacency and docility to authoritarianism and towards old world ideas. The monarchy is an old world idea. And even though it's ceremonial in your country right now, British people, it is still an idea that binds authority up in the mind with some divine quality. And in doing so, implicitly creates a culture of subservience in a tiered society that is beneath a divine quality. And so that's what we're seeing in Britain. That's why in the UK, you can't pray outside of an abortion clinic without being called hateful. That's why in the UK, a YouTuber can make a joke, a mean joke that was in any context would have not been construed as anything but someone being funny and get arrested for it. That's why in the UK, they can ban you from their country just because you hold unpopular beliefs, not even beliefs that will actually alter the fabric of your country, which they've kind of let other people with other beliefs do that. But anyway, that's a different story, different day. They will ban you just for having the freedom of conscience. Your politics doesn't matter. If you have a culture and where docility and complacency is the norm, your politics, in my opinion, becomes secondary. It's not that important. It is important, of course, but it becomes ultimately secondary. So in my opinion, a strong culture must reflect a strong mind. And a strong mind must be guided by sound principles. And sound principles can only be found through philosophy. And philosophy can only be understood through reason. So culture is not a political means to an end. It's not a political issue. Culture is a human issue, a moral issue, a philosophical issue. This is the level the right needs to rise to if it's actually going to win this culture war. Not the level of owning the libs and being funny and being outrageous. I'm sorry, but that kind of juvenile behavior will only get you a little bit past the starting gate with the people who already agree with you. And even then, on the right now, the waters, the wells, the rivers of understanding and commentary are so dry. A lot of influencers have nothing to offer you guys. I'm sorry. A lot of these people have nothing to edify you with. They can just entertain you. And when the rivers run dry and no longer deep and wide, where do you get your edification from? Where do you get your enlightenment from? Where do you get the fruit that will feed your soul, feed your mind, and turn you into a strong-minded person who can therefore create a strong culture? You don't get it anywhere. We need less entertainment and more edification. If the right really wants to win the culture war against the leftist zealots who seek to tear it down, who seek to deconstruct it, who seek to bind it down to the worldview of power and get rid of all the color and all the beauty that exists in culture inherently, then it must do so by appealing to human nature on a broad level. I think the best cultural artifact in America and the West that has been right-leaning and conservative in message, that has been able to impact the culture much more than a movie like Lady Ballers would, is undoubtedly Little House on the Prairie. Little House on the Prairie was both a novel, which was awarded a literature award for having a massive impact on the children, and it was also a TV series that ran from the 70s to the 80s, and from season 3 to season 7 was NBC's highest rated scripted series out of any category for several years. It had an immense cultural impact. And what did Little House on the Prairie talk about? Homesteading. Using your labor to make the land better, the land that you own, property rights, self-reliance, individual responsibility. All of these ideas, which are virtues, presume the source of virtue, which is your free will, and free will presumes a certain idea about the human being that is correct. That means he is self-acting and self-directing and empowers him to then use what he needs to do to create a good society. And this was once a powerful show for children. Compared to the stuff that children is being fed today, that was once a powerful show and novel for children. And that 100% reflects conservative values in a manner that rejects the deconstructionist leftist crap that tries to reduce society to this deterministic materialism, which whittles down your free will to nothing more than a product of social institutions, and which then whittles down your individuality to nothing more than this hodgepodge of different identity characteristics that were chosen for you far before you were born. What's more empowering? Self-reliance, individualism, property rights, understanding the nature of man, the importance of universal principles to adjust society, or power, materialism, reductionism? Evidently, the former is more stronger than the latter. And yet, we would much rather go on the level of those materialist sentiments and just mock and fight and own and scream and mock. When we have, on the right, the better values, the better message, and the better philosophy, which has been demonstrated through 270 plus years of American history to actually work in producing the highest level of human creativity known to man, in producing a flourishing society, in producing a society based on sound principles, the principle of justice and contracts, in producing societies that allow us to understand the world around us, rather than being bound by the unquestioned norms of the old world. The difference between the old world, which was Europe and all those countries before 1776, and the new world is where the emphasis of the institutions and the systems in those two worlds were. The emphasis of the old world was to status. If you were a serf born into a certain class, you were a serf your whole life. And yet in the new world, in the wilderness that was America, that was vast and largely unclaimed except for the few tribes that were around, you had no old world system to hold down. You had to survive. And not only did the colonial settlers survive, they thrived and showed the world what can happen when you reject ideas that had kept human creativity bound up in captivity for hundreds of years before the establishment of the Americas. That is the American conservative vision, to shepherd and herald the new world, its virtues, its messages, its traditions, its norms, into our current moment and use it as a laser beam to dissolve in a particle-like way the shackles that modern leftism has over the minds of Gen Z, over the minds of so many people who are unsuspecting or who are ignorant or who just may be mistaken, may be great people, but they're mistaken. But you won't do that if you debase your reason and rely solely on what your passion tells you and just engage in mockery. Little House on the Prairie is a better pathway for conservative influence and victory than Lady Ballers is. Let me be very clear. Daily Wire people, I have nothing against Daily Wire. They do a lot of good work. They have a lot of good movies even. Nothing against them. But this approach will do nothing more than harm the case for the right values, for sound philosophy, and for sound reason to return to society. One last point. When we engage in mockery, we create an anti-culture. The conflict in this world, this is my observation, is between culture and anti-culture. Culture comes from the Latin word cultura, which means to cultivate, to create. And that then goes into our intellectual idea of culture. All culture is, by definition, by etymology, is simply a bunch of people cultivating good habits, and then those habits becoming long-standing norms, and then those norms being produced into civilization. That's culture. But to cultivate good habits, you have to have sound thinking. And to have sound thinking, you have to have the right ideas. And to have the right ideas, you have to have the information at the disposal to you so that you can act upon. And to act upon the information, you have to have free will. And to have free will, you also have to have a reason. And to have all of these ideas, a sound culture presupposes philosophical concepts that are indispensable and inseparable from the human condition. But when we get into mockery, we destroy our sound mind. When we get into needless and petty conflicts, we destroy the sound exercise of our reason. And then, by doing that, we create a culture based on force and conflict, and not a culture based on the willing habituation of correct values, which creates correct outcomes. Rome was an anti-culture. People may say, well, what do you mean? The Roman Empire was based on forced conflict, forced conquest, lies, obfuscation, killing dissidents, all kinds of things, killing Christians. It was 100% an anti-culture. Culture was not maintained by the interaction between people and sound ideas. It was maintained by the sword. A lot of the Arab world is still living under anti-cultures. But America is probably the closest example to a sound and correct culture that the world has had so far. But we will debase ourselves to the level of the anti-culture if mockery and conflict, and not sound thinking and reason, becomes the standard of our ethos. My friends, watch what you want, but I think it benefits the right to be honest with itself that movies like Lady Ballers will do us no favors and will not serve to actually win any war, much less a cultural war. My friends, like this video, comment on this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel, donate to me if you want to help me. All that information is in the comment section down below. I love you guys so much. Please share, like, subscribe, and please stay pensive. Bye, everyone.